My father's view, and it didn't bother him too much. I mean, he, being a linguist, it was just another term frequently used, even though pejorative, uh, with sort of a note toward humor. My father was somebody who loved all the Polish jokes. There were always Polish jokes that were floating around, and he thought that they were pretty funny and that they would break ice, and that it was by joking and by communicating that you broke down the divisions, not that they created more. So even though the term was around more in his generation, it's not around that much anymore. Part of it is because you don't hear many slurs, just because of the politically correct society that we now inhabit. But it's hardly the most pejorative of racial epithets, and it's tough to want to attack Poles on race, white Catholics. So I don't see it as something that's very ubiquitous right now, or something that was so damaging even then when it was utilized more. It's such a difficult history with so much imperialism from every angle, especially from the East and the West. Uh, and it's not part of the popular knowledge that exists in the U.S. consciousness, of the Italian experience, the Irish experience are much more and better recognized than the Polish experience. And I think part of that is that when Poles came to this country, they assimilated. They wanted to work. They wanted to raise families. They wanted to be involved in the church, and their assimilation was at a very, very high rate. So instead of keeping sort of huge swaths of, there are obviously exceptions like Buffalo and other places, but and Chicago, huge swaths of Polish sub-society, like there are with Irish and Italian, for instance, or Russian, or Orthodox Jewish. The Poles assimilated really, really well. They worked hard. They built business. They moved to the suburbs, and this is something that you and I have also talked about with regard to keeping Polish culture alive. It's very difficult because of that assimilation. Because Poles, part of it, I think, is that Poles had such a tough history that they were prone to going to other corners of the world and integrating, almost by necessity. Yeah, I do, and I think that's something. I mean, something I like about the priorities of this government is that they know they lost the culture war for so many years, and they recognize the importance. My father used to say that politics is downstream from culture, and all the social trends that impact people's mentalities. Uh, so I'm certainly in favor of it. I just, I'm generally, my generally accepted view is that the taxpayer should not fund this. I certainly think that it would help. I'd like to see it in the marketplace. There's some great stories, whether it's the Siege of Vienna or the Battle of Warsaw. Obviously, World War II does very, very well, and that's a well-known part of history in general, the Holocaust in particular, and um, the concentration camps and death camps in Poland, uh, created by the Germans, not the Poles, as the New York Times sometimes seems to screw up. Uh, I certainly would like to see it. I know that there's a lot of ideas and treatments, and I know the cultural ministry has been vocal about wanting to orchestrate it. But I do believe that when the government is involved, you don't usually get a very good product. The incentive structures and accountability structures are not there to really set up a good and successful, well executed product. So I want to see it, but I would be less bulled up by the government taking charge and putting out a string of movies to address Polish history. I think that, certainly there can be encouragement. There can be some incentives set up, whether it's tax breaks like there's done in the U.S. and Canada, and in lots of parts of Europe. But, just blank checks from the government to have their friends make movies about Polish history, I don't expect those to do as well as if the market sources the ideas and the material and structures the product and executes it. Discussion, debate, discourse, debating Jan Gross, not criminalizing Jan Gross. Don't put out issue an arrest warrant. Don't go out and criminalize different parts of speech and make speech codes. This is why Germany is such a shitbox. Germany, everything's criminal hate speech, and freedom is dying in Germany, and they're breeding a generation of absolute lemmings who are inviting in their would-be vanquishers in the form of the Islamic world entering into Germany by their own design and invitation. It's insane. So I believe that you have to have a free and open discourse and speech to put forward your ideas and to get them to compete. Any coercion through criminalizing different parts of speech defeats the purpose. It doesn't. It ends up not helping. So I think really just education and debate and discourse, and I like a lot of things that Glinsky has done. At least vocalized the goals and what they'd like to see and encouraged it. I'm less inclined to be positive on when there is force applied to create the outcome you want. One of the things that we're seeing from Dobra Zmiana is a focus on history and less on math and science in the new education ideals, and that's problematic to Poland's prosperity and success and expansion and migration toward higher living standards. Because when the education system, much like the government and every other of its functions, takes hold of something, it usually does it dishonestly or imperfectly or in a broken way. So when I see this emphasis on rewriting Polish history, I'd rather have them have all the versions of Polish history be out there and compete to be taught by those who would instruct, not have just edicts coming out from the different ministries, the education ministry, the cultural ministry. There certainly are. I mean, to me, the most notable one is Nowy Dziennik, which is based in New Jersey. It's the largest Polish language newspaper. Certainly that, talks to Polonia. In terms of talking to Americans, America's a melting pot that, for the most part, doesn't really have interest in the past as much as the present and the future. So, I don't think a magazine devoted to Polish history like Dojeci has, Dojeci Historia, I don't think that's something that there's a market for in the U.S. I mean, this is a country of immigrants, and every group wants to keep their stories alive, and the way they do that is through their families and keeping the cultural ties that bind, which we've talked a good amount about. But to try and market this to Americans of non-Polish descent would be a waste of time. Unfortunately, as so much of culture, just like the academy and the legal field, the foreign service, it shifts left. The academic elites are in all of these spheres. And, the Polish American Congress is in Chicago. It's run like a Democrat Chicago machine group. They're not that interested in politicking anymore, even though that was their reason for conception, was to become a political lobby. And now they want to migrate from a political advocacy organization to a nonprofit educational one, which is really, it's just about, in my view, it's just about money. I don't think they do much to further anything about Polish interests. The only interests they further are those of the people who run it, and usually focused on one issue for them, which is money. The Kosciuszko Foundation and Piazza, Polish Institute of Arts and Sciences or something like this, they're very far left. Piazza had Sikorsky come speak last year. I set up a protest on the streets of Manhattan with people dressed up as Ośmiorniczki to protest Sikorsky, and we had an exchange, which was funny. There's some video online somewhere. The Kosciuszko Foundation was run by a guy, Alex Dorożynski, who thinks Bolek is an absolute hero and sympathizes with KOD. I mean, real academic leftists. A lot of Rezortowi are involved in these organizations, and they, where certainly Kosciuszko Foundation historically did very, very good work and scholarships and culture, and they still do some things with culture. But the how far left they are has made it so that so much of Polonia, the good Polish patriotic Polonia, are just disgusted with them. Just absolutely. They have no affinity for it whatsoever. For me, the person who I think is the number one, who's the best, who really knows and is recognized, but in smaller circles. He's not, it's not a very highly public figure, is Marek Hodakevich. He's one of my mentors, one of the smartest and best people I've ever known, a great intellectual, a great historian, a great strategist and tactician on national security issues, understands current and historical U.S. American, European, Polish politics very, very well. On recent Polish politics, I think I am because of the articles I've written for Breitbart. I mean, that got more flow, more readership, was seen by more people in Washington in the political class than I think any other accounts of recent Polish political history. So the shift to the right from PO to Law and Justice, dobra zmiana. Other figures, there are not that many. I'm trying to do what I do. Piotr Wilczek, the new ambassador, is very, very good. One of the best ambassadors Poland has is Anna Maria Anders, who is elegant and intelligent and very, very well spoken, speaks great English, French, Spanish, Polish. I mean, she's a very talented communicator. And she comes and we go to Washington all the time and have meetings to try and get people to be aware that it's not a fascist coup when Poles democratically select this government to represent them and represent their interests and try and purge the post-communist cancer and poison that PO and Nowoczesna and PSL and SLD all represent. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, in Polonia, Anders, and I'd say in Washington, Anders is also pretty well recognized by some very influential people, important people. But there's nobody with mass appeal that, Americans know by the, million. There's nobody like that. Marcin Gortat is probably the Pole that's most known. Seriously. I mean, if you ask most Americans on the street, can you name one Pole, living Pole? More people would say Marcin Gortat. He'd probably be the only person that would get over 100 responses. The popular conception is that the defeat of communism, very well orchestrated, mostly by Reagan, but also Thatcher, Pope John Paul II, and Wałęsa. He's considered, for Americans, an important figure. And he's also one of the ones probably most Americans know the name and recognize as Lech Wałęsa, the Nobel Prize, 1989, addressing Congress. Not enough Americans know about his real history that, we Poles now know. I've done a lot to make sure that they do. I've had many hundreds of conversations with Americans and many dozens with influential think tank people and journalists and politicians in Washington about Bolek and his real history. But the conception popularly about Poland since 1989 is that it did well, it did better than any other post-Soviet nation for several reasons, one of which is that it was more freedom-oriented, and I always make the argument because of all the imperialism that predated, so not just communism, but the Bolshevism in Russia before the communism, the Prussian and German and Tsarist and Austro-Hungarian and all the other pressures exerted on Poland over the last few hundred years. But the conception is that because Poles are very freedom-oriented, we're leaders in freedom. Even the saying, the toast to your freedom and ours, which is a decently well-known sort of toast, and people know the Polish history of it. But their view is that Poland did better. Part of that was Balcerowicz and shock therapy and reorganizing the economy in a much more dramatic and painful way earlier, and that Poland took to capitalism and Westernism and Atlanticism and NATO very, very, very well. They do not know, the truth about the post-communist transition, the commie to post-commie amnesty that happened from Magdalenka, and because of Bolek, and because of all of these dynamics. I've done a lot to try and talk about it, write about it. I've written about it in Breitbart. So it's it's a positive image, it's a positive reputation, a positive history, but it's a little bit flawed in the reality. And it's important that the truth be known, because only then can you really understand and real alliances can be built and learn from each other's experience. So I believe that the historical truth does need to filter out there more, something that I work on, that Anders works on, that Vilcek, the ambassador, works on, Marek Hodakiewicz as well, and John Lenchovsky at IWP. And then you've got the post-communist types like Alex Stodorzhinsky from Kosciuszko Foundation, who was very much in the Richard Schnempf school, and talking about how there's an evil fascist populist right that's threatening to undo the growth of freedom that Poland had under the post-communist period, which we know has been somewhat fraudulently depicted and sold. So it's Poland. Nothing's ever easy. Everything's always complicated. Oh, nobody's got any interest in actual issues. The only thing they have interest in is further perpetuating globalism and Eurocentrism so that the technocratic elite can continue running things and looting the place. I think PO and Applebaum, Sikorsky, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Politico, Reuters, the FT, CNN, BBC. They all have depicted the Poland. Everybody in Poland knows, that there's a fraudulent media war being waged against the populist right. We're seeing it with Trump, what they're trying to do to destabilize Trump and Flynn and this administration and Bannon and Breitbart, who have led the populist revolt and revolution and uprising successfully, tapped into the silent majority who are just fed up and not going to take it anymore. But the media depictions, I write about it all the time. We all talk about it. Anne Applebaum has done a incredible amount of damage. So has George Soros. And them aligning with their Rezartovi Jechi KOD. This is the way these leftist globalists think. They're hostile to those in the silent majority who just want to be left alone and to enjoy maximum freedom. They want to re-engineer technocratic, bureaucratic society that they run, and abrogate the nation-state sovereignty, abrogate the sovereignty of the individual. So we're up against this. This is something we've all been talking about for a year and a half now. Nothing new. But we're winning. Trump won, Brexit won, Poland's winning. Hungary and Poland and the Visegrad are creating a very strong firm opposition to the EU. The EU's dying. Netherlands is going to go to the right under Geert Wilders. I think Marine Le Pen is going to win in France. The EU died in June, the night of the Brexit. It died. It's just going to take 10 years to get sorted out. At least half the country is aware and sees that the European project is a failed one, very much on an analog to why America was going in the wrong direction under Obama. Things like immigration, things like tax and economic regulatory policy, environmental policy, all things that are petty power grabs by the technocratic elite and the corrupt looters that want to exit the party of Davos, Steve Bannon calls them. And Applebaum and Sikorsky certainly epitomize Soros, party of Davos. They all go to the Bilderberg group as well. Very, very discreet conclaves where the technocratic elite go to plan how they're going to control the world. They're very anti-populist. They're very anti-will of the people. So I think that in America we've woken up to a populist, a silent majority speaking out and winning the highest offices and shifting the country to the right. And so they're not friendly to the European Union. I think they get it. They're most Americans I deal with on the right were very happy with Brexit, and the right is winning. The right is taking over most levers of government in the United States today. Nobody knows about it. Nobody cares. I doubt 1 in 1,000 people in America know about Smolensk. Even if you talk to very well assimilated Polonia, third generation Poles, they probably don't know about it either. They might have seen the news story when it hit, but there's no awareness of the controversy. The U.S. media obviously hasn't depicted the inner cross currents of the Polish debate about this. Poland is, by and large, if you talk to almost anybody on the street, everyone would know that Poland is one of our strongest allies. And some people would even know about Kosciuszko and Pulaski, because you do learn about it in school during the revolutionary period. There's a view that Poland and America are very, very close. that historically, this was the first that Poland was integral in the fight against communism. That it was in a lot of ways the birthplace of the 1980s breakdown. Solidarity is people know about solidarity. People know about the history as it's popularly depicted in the 80s. Again, Lech Wałęsa is a hero, but a lot of accuracy about solidarity, and Poland being the first domino to really break down the Iron Curtain. And Pope John Paul is very, very well respected and revered here as well. I mean, there are a lot of Catholics in this country, and even non-Catholics, Christians of other denominations have huge respect and reverence for John Paul II, which is great. They don't. I don't think most Americans put two and two together on it. I think they know that the European Union is a failing project, but not aware of what's going on in Central Europe as much as in or in sort of the eastern part of the EU versus, say, Germany or Denmark, Netherlands, France, or even the UK with the immigrants and the refugees and the crime and the rapes and the arsons and the economic social welfare states that are imploding upon themselves. I think they're much more aware of that framework of the EU than about what's going on with Poland. Nobody knows anything about the tribunal. You have to be really focused on Poland to be aware of Poland, Warsaw, and Brussels fighting over the media and the tribunal and. The way the New York Times and Washington Post painted, it's a fascist coup because the populist right and some those who are very well aware of the news cycle are probably aware of this frame, but not too deep into it. Much better than Obama. Already they're after NATO. NATO has become more hawkish, which is good. Trump is committed to NATO. I mean, I said this during the campaign that this was all campaign rhetoric about NATO, and he was right to say it, that 23 nations do not pay anything into the NATO complex budget. So, 5 nations do. Poland's one of them. Ironically, so is Greece. UK is one, so they're going to be, they'll be out of the EU, but they'll still be a big part of NATO. And that's my belief is that all of them, the EU is not a guarantor of security. All it is a guarantor of insecurity because of the immigration policy. I would rather see the focus be on NATO. Trump has the same feeling. Pence and Mattis just confirmed this and validated it in Munich this past week. So the conversations I've had in Washington, everybody on the right and the left, the Democrats and Republicans, all support, for the most part, troops in Poland. Trump is going to be very, very good for Poland. The alliance is going to be very, very strong. Bannon's a huge fan of Central Europe. Bannon understands that Hungary and Poland have led the way in defending Western civilization historically, and now again against the EU, against the Islamic world. Which really is, it wants to vanquish every other culture it comes into contact with. It doesn't want to assimilate. It doesn't want to work toward a common goal of nation statehood. It wants to change from within. And, this is like Sobieski. Poland has proven once again that it is a guarantor of fighting for Western civilization, as has Hungary under Orban. So I think this is well recognized in this White House because I know that Bannon knows a lot about it. We've spoken a lot about it. I wrote for him. He recruited me to write for Breitbart about these subjects because of what was going on, because of this shift to the right in politics in Central and Eastern Europe. So he gets it, and he's a huge component of all foreign policy and all policy coming out of the White House.